Too many families across Toronto have suffered tragedies this summer from violence. Too many communities are rocked almost every summer by spates of gun violence.
We have to address the root causes of gun violence and get much tougher with criminals who often laugh at things, literally laugh at things like bail and sentencing practices, both the laws and the way in which they're implemented. People are expecting us to do more together.
That meeting between the Prime Minister and Toronto Mayor John Tory took place earlier today following a violent weekend in Canada's biggest city. There were 14 separate shooting incidents across the city over the August long weekend, injuring 17 people. In fact, Toronto is on track to set a troubling record this year. There have been 401 victims of shootings in Toronto so far in 2019. That's an increase of 19% compared to the same time last year. Last month alone, there were 81 shootings in Toronto. In response, federal, provincial, and municipal governments say they're pooling $4.5 million to provide funding for Toronto police. So what else is the federal government willing to do to reduce gun violence? Will it act on calls for a handgun ban? Marco Mendicino is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Infrastructure and Communities. He joins us now from Toronto. Hi, Mr. Mendicino. Great to see you again.
Hi, Vashi.
Help us understand, and our viewers understand, particularly those in the Toronto area, why they're going to have to wait until your party releases an election platform to find out exactly or the full extent of what you're going to do to deal with gun violence.
Well, because in addition to all of the measures we've taken to keep communities safe, we want to put this to the people in the form of a mandate. But let me just build on some of the comments that you made in your opening, which is that gun violence is a stubborn, pernicious problem, particularly in my hometown. And it seems that every summer we have to deal with this. It was a problem 4 years ago when I first got elected. It's still a problem now. I was in the community last night, and to say that the mothers and fathers that I spoke to are anxious and nervous is a gross understatement. And so that's why we've taken action on a number of fronts when it comes to introducing legislation like Bill C-71, which would ensure that there are more comprehensive background checks, tighter regulations when it comes to the transportation of guns. In addition to that, we've put more resources into law enforcement and police, but we can't arrest ourselves out of the situation, as both the PM and the mayor said. And we do want to continue to look at some of the root causes and to prevent these crimes from occurring in the first place, which is why, for example, in Lawrence Heights, which is in my community, we want to build a new community center. There was a $14 million commitment that was made under the last provincial government. Sadly, the premier decided to backtrack on that. We want to build so that we can stop seeing this type of crime by building safer spaces, and it's my hope that he'll reverse course and do that.
Okay, I take your point on that one center, but the ask specifically from Toronto Mayor John Tory, pointing to the problem that you say, you admit has been around for years, is for a handgun ban. And the Prime Minister has been clear in not being clear the past few times he's been asked that you will not make any announcement on that until a platform is released. Why are you unwilling to say, right now, whether or not you would respond, to John Tory's request with a handgun ban?
Well, I think we've been unambiguous that we want to tackle this problem. And as I said, we've done so through the introduction of Bill C-71. And when it comes to addressing additional measures, including the potential for a targeted city handgun ban, which I personally support and which there are many advocates within our government, Minister Bill Blair has undertaken an extensive consultation to ensure that this will be an evidence-based approach. Now, those conversations will continue to unfold, and we want to be sure that we get that measure right.
Okay, let me ask you what that means. Targeted, I understand that you're not announcing that. You said you support a targeted city handgun. What would that mean? How does the criminal code allow for example, just Toronto to ban handguns?
Well, that's precisely one of the things that we have to examine very carefully, which is how do you enact legislation to work with all levels of government? And certainly we would want to see the province step in to cooperate in this area. Again, another area where Premier Ford has already precipitously announced that he wouldn't support such a measure, which I think is quite unfounded and
what kind of provincial
regrettable.
Support would you need?
Well, I think first and foremost, we need to have the cooperation of the province to play its proper role in this area, which would allow, to help share in the responsibility of keeping our community safe by working with the City of Toronto to ensure that it's harder for criminals to put their hands on guns. And these are sensible measures. They're measures which have worked in other jurisdictions where by the introduction of them, we've seen gun crimes come down. But again, I think we get very much bootstrapped.
What we get bootstrapped
into the area. Well, I'm
like
talking
the ban.
Well, that's certainly one
just
area that
building
we've
the
looked at. But what I was about to say, Vashi, is we get sort of bootstrapped into talking about one measure when you're looking at reducing gun violence, you have to look at the full panoply of measures which we've introduced, including investing in infrastructure, including investing in mental health resources, so that we address the root causes. And it's only by doing all of those things simultaneously that we can actually get at the crux of the problem. And when it comes to my community, I will tell you, it's disheartening to have to come onto this program and talk just about guns, because there's so much else good that is going on in Lawrence Heights when it comes to the programs that we're supporting, especially during the summer when you're out there engaging with young people. My hope is that we're going to be able to talk more about those positive things, including building this community center, which again, I've implored the Premier and the province to really revisit this $14 million investment, which was previously made, and to reverse that course of action so that we can see it get built as quickly as possible.
I understand your point about it being a multi-pronged solution, and I don't think, I'm certainly not suggesting that a handgun ban is the only way to accomplish that, but Mayor Tory has been specific in his call for one, in his ask for one, and that call has been made multiple times. The consultations, for example, that you referred to from Bill Blair wrapped up back in April. He came on the show the day that they were released. I mean, you've had them in your hands for a long time. So I just want to be clear, because there are a lot of people in Toronto watching who are concerned about the escalation in violence. We saw that number, 19% increase over the same period of time last year. Why it's going to take a platform to come out with a decision one way or the other.
As am I, as are many members of our caucus, and quite frankly, so is Minister Blair, who himself is a former chief of police who worked very hard and very diligently to keep this town safe and saw through it some very challenging times. So I see that his voice and his expertise in this area is an asset to our ability to come to the right place when it comes to picking all the policy measures. All I'm trying to emphasize is that while we're looking at all of these options, we also have to tackle some of the other challenges. And we can't do this on our own. It can't be that every time Premier Ford makes a cut to a critical service, that the federal government is going to step in. Eventually, we need the Premier and the province of Ontario to cooperate with us, particularly as it relates to infrastructure, because it is only by building resilient communities, including community centers where kids and families congregate, that we're going to see more safe spaces. And that's how we're going to see progress on this really, really tough file.
Again, I take your point on the Lawrence Point Centre, but the province did match the $1.5 million from the federal government and from the city. My understanding is it's new money from the feds, new money from the city. It's a portion of money already allocated from the province, but that still is $1.5 million, the exact same amount that your government has directed towards this specific cause where the police are concerned.
And that piece is encouraging, and obviously we'd like to see more resources, but I come back to the point about the things that we have done. On Bill C-71, important measures there which would make it harder for criminals to put their hands on guns. What would Andrew Scheer do? He said right off the top, as Prime Minister, he would repeal that legislation. That is completely nonsensical and, quite frankly, counterproductive to public safety. And when it comes to the other things that we're advancing, in particular as it relates to infrastructure, as it relates to investments in mental health, and many other areas which I have seen tangibly. As the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Infrastructure, I've traveled across not only Ontario but across the province. I see the direct positive benefits of building strong communities. What we need right now is a partner in Ontario, and we don't have that yet.
What evidence will you be using, will your party be using in order to decide whether or not to make a ban part of your platform? Because my understanding is the evidence is very wanting, that there is, or lacking, that there is, it's very hard to tell how many guns are, there's no concrete sort of report out that shows how many guns were Canadian legal guns, how many were smuggled across the U.S. So what evidence will you, because you've said that the decision will be based on evidence, what evidence will you be using?
Well, we'll look at where the source of these guns are coming from. For example, at the border, which is why we've invested over $80 million in CBSA and other public safety agencies to make it harder for illegal trafficker or trafficking of unlawful guns across the border. But we also have to take a look at the internal trafficking of lawful guns and unlawful guns, which again is not...
Is there an official data set for that? Because my understanding is there is not.
Well, there have been some statistics which have shown that there is an increasing trend of unlawful domestic trafficking, and that's why we've put the additional resources that you've already referred to when it comes to domestic police, whether it's the RCMP or, in my case, in the hometown of Toronto, the Toronto Police Service. But we also have to look at foreign jurisdictions and seeing how they're tackling the problem, and there we do draw some positive examples on additional measures which we've already referred to. And then we have to get back to building communities. We have to get into the space of building transit so that all all communities are integrated, and that, for example, a community like Lawrence Heights isn't segregated and walled off from the rest of our neighborhood. We need to reintegrate the community so that everybody can get access to work, to school, to play, and back and forth. And that is something that I have been working very diligently on over the last number of years, as is our government, and I look forward to continuing that important work.
All right, Mr. Mendocino, I'm out of time, but thank you so much for making time for us this evening. That's Marco Mendocino, Toronto Liberal MP out of CBC Toronto. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Vashi.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau sat down with Toronto Mayor John Tory earlier today to discuss gun violence in the city. They've each pledged to give $1.5 million to the Toronto Police to help tackle the issue, with the province also contributing $1.5 million to put more boots on the ground. The mayor has repeatedly asked the feds for a handgun ban. So far, though, Trudeau hasn't committed to one, only noting that gun violence solutions would be unveiled in his party's upcoming election platform. So, would a handgun ban solve the problem? And if not, what could the solution be? What are the political considerations? Time for the Power Panel to weigh in. In Vancouver, former Conservative Cabinet Minister Stockwell Day, political commentator and columnist Tiffany Gooch joins us from Toronto. Here with me in studio, political commentator and former NDP MP Françoise Boivin. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. Françoise, why don't I start with you? Let's talk a bit about the politics behind this. Of course, there's certainly a debate around the merits of whether or not a ban would actually solve the problem. Why do you think the Liberals are waiting until an election platform to say yes or no to one?
Well, because it is political, and the best time to score points, in their opinion, probably is to do so during the campaign. Other than that, I can see no actual justification, or they have no plan and they will go back in the drawing room and try to have a plan. It's one of the biggest problems, and it's not since yesterday. It's been on for decades. We know with street gangs and border, how easy it is to cross the border with some of those handguns. It's not the first time we hear, let's ban those handguns. I'm not sure it's going to work. It sounded more political, that press conference, like, keep listening to us. We will come down the road with something. But here's some money. We don't exactly know for what, which for me was the most interesting point, was when the chief said, from Toronto Police, I will come back with a plan.
Days, yeah.
So basically, 3 level of government send money, which I'm not saying is not needed, but we're not actually sure for exactly where they're gonna put it. So it just adds to the cynicism of the population, who will say, oh, same old, here we go again, when it is a real problem in some big cities.
Tiffany, what do you think whatever comes out in the platform might look like? And I ask because Mr. Mendocino, who's the parliamentary secretary to Bill Blair, who's in charge of this file, sort of hinted that he himself, well, he said outright that he himself supports sort of a ban that would be specific to an individual city. Is that what you think the party is looking at, and how feasible might that actually be?
So I think, first of all, as they're responding to asks that are coming from the Toronto mayor, there's definitely a specific piece that is aiming to answer what the mayor's requests have been. But this is a national campaign. This is a cross-country campaign that's coming up. And so I think that there's definitely a need to ensure that the local context is considered for how this would roll out. And I would say personally, I'm quite hopeful to see that that this doesn't only include sort of ban discussions, and that there's a wider approach that's taken. I think that it's always been clear that it's better to deal with this in a proactive approach rather than reactive and waiting until we have issues that have popped up in certain cities, rather than looking for ways to reduce poverty and look at the roots of violence that are required to be touched on. So I would say for a campaign or a platform commitment, if we're going to see one, I'm hopeful to see one that has a very holistic approach and is considerate of the roots of violence, as well as all of the other ways within which this needs to be combated.
Stockwell, what do you think the political considerations are, not just in how the Liberals end up handling this, but the other parties as well?
Well, if it's a very widespread blanket that is thrown here, and $1.5 million in the city of Toronto, I mean, that sounds like a lot of money, but depending how you spend it, it may or may not help the problem. This year alone in Toronto, sadly, 400 shootings. I mean, I guess it's one good thing that these idiots who are doing the shooting are poor shooters, because the death toll would have been a lot higher. The focus is, and it's the same in the United States as in Canada, some years it's up to 90% of the gun violence is handguns, it's not rifles. and it's illegal handguns, and it's young men, and it's gangs. But whenever you start talking like that, the voices of political correctness go on the rise, and they start screaming about things like profiling. And listen, it's young men, and it's gangs. And if the main targets are
profiling is a thing. It's not.
Profiling is truly a thing, but we have to be able to say it's young men, mainly. It's illegal guns. It's gangs. So concentrate the funds in the areas where they're needed most. It was only a few years ago that the Lower Mainland out here in BC had the most shooting deaths, and the local police will tell you they know the neighborhoods. But anytime you put in increased surveillance in a neighborhood, right away you get accused of all kinds of things. So it's a tough problem, and I think people have to face up to it. And Tiffany's quite right. There's a lot of different issues here. I remember Barack Obama, as president, talked about the problem of, and he didn't color code it, and I use that in a literal sense. He said the problem in the poor neighborhoods is absentee fathers. He was really clear on that. If anybody else had said that, they would have been totally annihilated in the media, but he said it, and he said it in a heartfelt way because he knew what the main problem is. So yes, I agree with Tiffany, a holistic approach, especially in those neighborhoods, because that's where all the shooting is coming from. Illegal and young and gangs.
Well, I think it's just, I don't have the data for all those 400 shootings in front of me, so it's hard to know whether, in fact, that they have all been committed for this. I think that the issue of racial profiling is, I take your point, but the issue of racial profiling, specifically in Toronto, has been one in the past.
Right.
I also know that I take your point on the type of guns that are being used, and I think that's actually a crucial part of the discussion, because there really is a lack, Françoise, of evidence, of firm data that tells us exactly how many guns are legal, exactly how many have been smuggled across the border. And there has been, the federal government, to its credit, has allotted more money towards the CBSA and the work that's being done on guns coming across the border. But there is no concrete set of data out there. So, I think I put the question to Marco Mendocino, but how do you what are you basing the decision one way or the other? How are you basing the decisions you make in combating this problem? Because the data is lacking.
The data is lacking for sure, but if I remember correctly from a report that was produced by the committee, a government committee on the use of handguns, I think it's Bill Blair was saying that over 90% of the guns used in those shootings were not from legally obtained guns. So that's already a very important statistics in my point of view. It shows that it comes.
Lots of the RCMP detachments don't even keep track of that data. That's the weird part.
Maybe they don't. But like Stockwell was saying the police is well aware of the gangs. They know who they are, where they are, what they do. Often if you take time to talk with policemen. I've done it in my area, in Gatineau, in Ottawa. They all say the same. Most of the time, they don't have enough force on the ground to make sure that their presence is there, that they can police and do what they should be doing instead of giving tickets on Highway 417 or 401, to be in those neighborhoods, and at the same time to address poverty issues. Stockwell was talking about absentee father in poor neighborhood. I'd say just stick to the word poor. Poverty is one of the reasons that these people resort to some violence sometimes. But it takes a full, complete approach, and I think they have much more statistics than they let us to believe. Except it takes one of those events, sadly, Vashi, to wake up the political class, and it never makes for the best decision when they they decide at those moments.
Tiffany, last word to you before I take a commercial break.
No, I would say I'm hopeful that we can come to some level of a sustainable approach to this rather than reactive, and one that's looking at the holistic approach, not only police force.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.